All righty. Good morning. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Why can't I hear? Are you on mute, Michelle?
No.
No, hold on a second. Give me 2 seconds here. Now I hear. Yeah. Say something, Michelle.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I hear you. Okay, I just had the wrong speakers on. Everything becomes very technical when you use when you do classes over Zoom. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us. Hi, Ellen. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? I'm very well, thank you.
Great. Been a long time since I last
It's been
saw
a
you.
long time.
Very
Yeah.
long time. So it's great to see you. And we're just going to wait for a few more
Morning,
people.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Don. How are you?
I'm good.
Well, that's
I'm
very
good.
good. Good to see you. I hope
I've taken up woodworking. I've taken up woodworking, so I'm making a sculpture that I have to get done by Valentine's Day for my wife.
Oh,
Aw.
well, you got my blessings on that one.
Okay.
And
Happy wife.
You're in
Happy
Connecticut
wife.
or New York? Or New York?
We're in Connecticut right now.
Connecticut. Okay. I hope there's not too much snow. I heard there's going to be another snowfall.
Mhm.
Yeah, Vicky's just saying, there's going to be shredding noise.
Right. My sister was in Miami last week, and she came home yesterday, and she comes home, and just a blanket of snow right in her driveway, on her steps, and you got to clean it up. So those of us who are living here in the West Coast, I guess, except for Flagstaff,
Oh,
we should feel very fortunate.
It snowed in Vegas.
absolutely.
I heard it snowed in Vegas. Oh, you were there?
Yeah, we were there, and my granddaughter just said, I want to touch the snow, and said, well, the mountains are too far, we're not gonna go. And we woke up in the morning, and the snow was on our
On the ground.
car, and, you know, it was a miracle.
Yes, we had a miracle snow in Vegas. So we have two people here in person. We have Rob and Mimi. And maybe next time I'll get a third camera so everybody can see you guys. Come on, you see them, they should see you. Anyhow, so when I do the class today, I'm going to be, we have more people coming in. I just want to make sure everybody's in. If you see me looking in any other direction except for the camera, it means that I'm looking at real people. You see, I don't know if you guys are real people on Zoom. I don't know. Maybe this is all a dream. It's a figment of my imagination that people showed up. Anyhow. Hi, Shoshana. Good morning. I see Ted next to you.
Hi.
Out there in New Jersey.
Right.
Too much snow in your front lawn.
A lot of snow. It looks like a winter wonderland here.
Well, I love the positivity there. A winter wonderland. I don't want to say what my sister said when she saw the snow when she came home last night from Miami. She was not too happy. She went back to New York. All right. It looks like most
Good morning.
logged on. I know that a few people are supposed to come on. I hope they're not having any troubles logging in. Let me just quickly look at my phone to make sure that no one is texting me to say I can't get on, because last night I had that issue. Okay, it looks like I have no messages here. So what we'll do is we're going to get the show on the road. So first of all, I want to welcome everybody. Oh, we got another customer. I want to welcome everybody to our winter course. This is our first course. I'm sorry, this is our second course since Rosh Hashanah, but the first course for 2021, and it's considered our winter course. And this is a very, very popular course that we're going to be doing. And when I say popular, that's because more people than normal signed up to this course, and I understand why.
Good.
And it's probably because of a curiosity. It's something that's very untangible. It's not very easy to grasp it. It's not very easy to get a hold of it. And people are just ready to listen to anything that they cannot get a hold of, and someone else can give them that information. So I hope that for the next 6 weeks, God willing, we're going to be able to make the lesson meaningful And hopefully the most important part of learning is, so we should have a lesson from it. We can make our lives better, make our lives a lot easier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be muting everybody. You have permission to unmute yourself if you have any questions or any comments or any compliments. And all complaints can be sent to Michelle. Michelle will handle all the complaints. She's very good at handling complaints. All kidding aside, there are no big rules that we have here, except that everybody should pay attention. And we're going to have a big test at the end of every lesson. And if you don't pass the first lesson, you can't go on to the second lesson. So make sure you pass your test. Otherwise, you'll be sitting here for the rest of the year. That won't be good. But the real test will be how you live your life. That's the test. And God will be the tester and the one who will give you a mark on your life. So again, if you want to share something, you want to say something, you can either raise your hand or you could just unmute yourself and ask whatever it is that you'd like to ask. So we're gonna get going here. This class is gonna be for about an hour and a half. It's 90 minutes. That's the typical JLI class. And I'm happy that you're here, and I'm happy that we have 2 people here in person. That's very, very special, and that makes the class more meaningful to have people in person and have people on Zoom. So the title of the course is called Journey of the Soul, and it's exactly what it's all about. We're going to be talking about the journey of the soul. Lesson number 1 is titled Demystifying Death, a perspective on life and beyond. Notice I did not use the subtitle for this lesson is not perspective on death and afterlife, but perspective on life and beyond. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we start the lesson, as any good rabbi does, you have to make a joke. Otherwise, the people won't listen to you. Whether the joke is good or bad is irrelevant, but it's nevertheless, in my opinion, a cute little story. So here's the story. There was a guy who was dating a lovely woman, and this is in the beginning of their courtship, and they went out to a restaurant. And the guy in the middle of the meal realized that this date was not going really well, and he really needed to go home. So what he did was he excused himself, and he said, I need to go to the bathroom. So he goes to the bathroom, pulls out his cell phone, and he calls his best friend. And he says to him, best friend, in 10 minutes, I want you to call me. Don't ask me why or when. You don't have to say anything. Just call me. That's all I want you to do in 10 minutes. And he goes back to his place in the restaurant. And he sits down. And now 10 minutes go by. And of course, the phone rings. And he answers the phone. Hello? And he goes, yeah? Really? When? Oh my goodness. I can't believe it. I better leave. I have to leave. And he hangs up the phone. And the woman who he's dating, she asks him, so what happened? He says, you wouldn't believe it, but my grandmother passed away. I got to go. She goes, it's good that your grandmother passed away, because had your grandmother not passed away, my grandmother would have passed away. Okay. I hope everybody got that one. Very good. You like that one, Mimi?
I thought that was.
Do I get a few points for that? Okay. 3 points. Only 3 out of 10. That's good considering. All right. So that's our little joke for to get the lesson started here. So as I mentioned earlier, the subtitle of this course was about life and beyond. And more specifically, it's about life and death and afterlife. That's what this course is going to be all about. And today we have something very important to share with everybody. I'm very excited to share a beautiful idea that hopefully will be meaningful, and hopefully a person can absorb the ideas and make it work in their own lives to live the most meaningful and the best kind of life you could live. Now, it's like a no-brainer, because in the last 10 months or so, every one of us probably, I can't imagine no one did, every one of us has thought about our mortality. Who's not thinking about our mortality? And probably in the last 10 months, we're thinking about our mortality more frequently than usual. And it's obviously because of the pandemic, and because every day we see numbers of people passing away just from COVID. We know people are dying as people die on a normal basis from other things, but certainly from COVID. Many people know people who have passed away, and we're hearing it in the news, or we know someone who knows someone, but everybody is sort of connected to this idea of people passing away. So we're thinking about our mortality. There's no one who's getting away with it. And even without the pandemic, if you're just walking on this planet, it would only make sense, it would only be natural, it would only be normal for a person to think about the idea of illness and pain and the loss of life. I mean, that's the way life is. You know, the older you become, the more connected you become with your mortality. So the reality of life ending brings up very, very important questions. So when we speak about the end of life issues, there's a whole bunch of questions that need to be addressed. And that perhaps is the reason that we're all here, to find some kind of answers or explanations, or maybe some insight to understanding our mortality. So some of the questions would be, what happens when we die? That's a very common question. So where do we go? And what happens? Another question people ask is, can we remain connected with those we love and lost after their passing? Is there a way that I can connect and bond with someone? Can I continue to love someone who's no longer here physically? Can our loved ones communicate with us? That's a very big one. Is there a way for people to communicate with people who have passed on? I remember personally many years ago, there was a young woman in our community, a 36-year-old woman who passed away. She was an attorney, very successful. She had a young child. He was then, I think, 7 or 8 years old. It was very sad, and she passed away. Her dad, I think, proclaimed himself either an agnostic or maybe even an atheist, but certainly was not someone who is entrenched in observance of Judaism, was not this big believer. And he was a doctor, he was a physician, he was a pediatrician. And he always, before his daughter passed away, he was in retirement, he had just retired, he would bring his grandson to school, where we were working at the Chabad at that time in Lamida. And then he would tell me, he'd poke fun at this observance and poke fun at this belief and that belief. And then when his daughter died, he literally begged me that I should put him in communication with his daughter up in heaven. And I said, look, this is not what I do. I'm not going to fool you and make you think that I can put you in communication. There are different ways that one can get consolation. One can comfort themselves with the passing of a loved one, especially if it's a child. And one day, I'll never forget, like a few weeks later, he dropped off his kid and he says to me, he says, Rabbi, you wouldn't believe it, but now I'm in direct communication with my daughter. And he went to one of these, what do you call them? These mind readers, or not mind readers, but psychics. He went to a psychic, literally someone on the street. And the woman had different tricks up her sleeve, and she was able to make him believe that he was communicating with his loved one. And it comforted him. And I wasn't going to tell him, look, you're wasting your money. In my mind, I felt very bad for him because it really wasn't true. But this is what brought comfort to him. This is what brought some solace in his life. So I let it go. So the question is, can we have communication with a loved one, is a big question that people ask about when somebody passes away. How can a person heal after experiencing the loss of a loved one? So what are the methods of healing in our lives? Judaism has a wonderful way of healing, going through a process called Shiva, Kaddish, a whole bunch of stuff that we will learn, not today, but in one of our other lessons. Is there a heaven and a hell? People want to know. So if we have a soul and it goes somewhere, is there a heaven and a hell? And exactly what is heaven and what is hell? Do Jewish people believe in reincarnation? This is perhaps one of the biggest concerns and biggest questions that people ask. Does Judaism believe in reincarnation? And people are surprised when I tell them the answer to that question. Now, there is an answer, and the answer is yes. I'm not going to lie to you, because if it was no, then we'd have no discussion. But the answer is yes. But it's much more nuanced, and we'll reserve that for lesson number 5. In lesson number 5, we're going to talk about the idea of reincarnation. And finally, what is the ultimate destiny? These are the questions that we ask, or some of us ask some of these questions, which we're going to discuss in our 5-week course, God willing. Now, all these ideas that we are speaking about are not just ideas that I made up or some nice rabbi made up or some good philosopher made up, or someone who has a great imagination. All of the ideas that we're going to be talking about starting today for the next 6 weeks are all based on Torah. So when I say Torah, the Torah runs the gamut from scripture, the Bible as we call it, the 5 books of Moses, the books of prophets, to the Talmud, to the Mishnah, to the Midrash. But most importantly, and I say most importantly because in order to be able to discuss things that are not as tangible as, say things that Jewish law talks about. Jewish law talks about tort laws. It talks about laws of damages. It talks about how to make weddings and how to get divorced, God forbid. It talks about how to bury somebody. But about soulful ideas, you need Jewish mysticism. And we are going to use the Kabbalah, sources of Kabbalah, to be able to understand all the idea of life, death, and the afterlife. We have to use that. We don't have any other mechanism. And because we are believers of the Torah, at least for the sake of this class, we are believers that the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, are divine, and those teachings were passed on orally through Moses, then there are truths in the ideas that we're going to talk about. So all of these ideas are linked and very much connected to ideas that are discussed throughout the history of Jewish scholarship and learning. Now, the intention of this course is not only to know what happens at the time of death, which is important. It's good for us to understand it. So it's not just to satisfy a very specific curiosity that we all have. I'm sure we all have. I have curiosity all the time, especially about these issues. I don't think about it all the time, but nevertheless, it's something that we're very curious about. But it really is meant, the whole course is really meant to radically transform our understanding of what life is all about. We're hoping that we're able to transform ourselves so that we can live our lives more meaningful. We can live our lives on a higher plane if we understand the ideas of afterlife and perhaps before life, soulful ideas. We could live this physical life in a much different way. So this is what we're going to be doing for the next 6 weeks. The course will shed light basically on 3 areas of life. Number 1, it's going to shed light on mind and soul. So we're going to be delving into philosophies about death and afterlife and reincarnation. It's philosophical. It's spiritual philosophy, but it is philosophy. So we're going to satisfy the intellect, the mind. We're going to hopefully be able to address the emotions because we all have emotional feelings about the ideas of death. And then we're going to talk about the practical. How does one comfort another person? How many times do we go to a shiva and we don't even know what to say? We don't know what to say to the person, especially if the person who passed away is a very young person. They passed away way before the time that they should have passed away. We almost are at a loss of words. What does one say? And in some cases, maybe saying nothing is important, just to be there, to really make the other person realize that you're really there for them. But we'll talk about that at another time. So we're going to learn about practical ideas about how we deal with our personal loss and how we help other people to deal with their loss. Okay, so having said that, we're going to begin, and we're going to begin by way of like a little introduction over here. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up the class to a question. I'd like to ask everybody a question, and if anybody can answer it, it's not a very difficult question. I'm not looking for a specific answer. It's an open-ended question. It's in a way subjective because there can be various different answers. In one word, here's the question. In one word, which word would you use to associate death? So what word comes to your mind when you hear the word death? If I say the word death, what is a word that comes to your mind? If anybody wants to share, just unmute yourself and shout it out.
Fear of the unknown.
Fear. All right, let's use one word. Fear.
Fear.
Very good. What else?
Finality.
Finality. Very good word. Yes. What other words? Loss. Loss is a very good word. Okay.
Peace.
All right. How about grief? I have the advantage here because I studied the lesson, and and I had to think about these things. So I wrote the notes. So I sound like a nice genius here, but I did think about it. How about grief? Maybe reunion, you could think about. The word gone, unknown, regrets, scary, finality. Somebody mentioned finality. Unfinished also was mentioned. Those are words that we would typically use when we hear the idea of death. The common denominator is they're pretty much all emotional feelings. It's all about emotions. But I think the strongest word and reaction that we could use for death is pretty much the word that is what we'll call fear. Okay, fear is the greatest emotion that a person has. I mean, and by the way, this is subjective. It doesn't mean it's set in stone, because some people say, I really don't fear death itself. They might fear other parts of it, but the death itself, they don't fear, and that's fine. But I think in general, the word fear is the emotional reaction to death. So it's not set in stone, but it is something that's very big. It's pretty much one of the most common emotions about our own death. In fact, the response today, this morning, was the first person that gave a response used the word fear of the unknown. So the word fear is a very big one. So today we are going to discuss, right now, at least as an introduction, our feelings about our own mortality, okay? So we have to gain a Jewish perspective on death. If we are fearful of it, let's hope that Judaism has some insight, has some way and mechanism to help us to be able to overcome this fear that we have. But before I talk about what Judaism has to say, what exactly is this sense of fear? What are we fearing? Again, it's an open-ended question. Who can give some answers here? What do we fear? So someone said already, fear of the unknown. Very good. What other ideas? And this is not a one word. You can say a sentence. What other things are we actually fearful when we think about death? What is the emotional fear? If
Well,
anybody,
how my
Say it again?
family will cope with it. I said how my family will cope.
Exactly. Very good. So after my passing, how will my family cope? That is the fear. What other fears do people think about? What other emotional reactions to the fear can anybody share with us here? So if I'll give you the answer just to get the class moving here. I think one of the biggest fears we have is, death is really absolute and it's final. Look, we have a lot of suffering in our lives. We have physical pain, we have emotional pain, we have frustrations, we got problems with our children that are making us crazy. We have financial uncertainty. We have a lot of things that bother us in life. We have emotional fear about a lot of things in life. But the good news about all of those things is there's an expiration date for each one of those things. It's not final. So at least in our wishful thinking, they will come to an end and we will continue to live our lives. It's not final. The only thing that's final in life, the only two certain things in life that are final is paying taxes and dying. Those are the two for sure things that are going to happen in life. But certainly, taxes, we might hope they'll get either lower or somehow somebody's going to come up with a way to abolish taxes. But when it comes to death, it is the only idea of all of our fears that it is final, it is absolutely final, and it's done, and it's over. That's it. That perhaps is the emotional fear that some people might have. It's a very common kind of a fear. In fact, there's something very, very interesting. That the human being of all creations, we know that God created this universe. The Torah tells us that God created the world in 6 days, and he rested, of course, on the seventh day. All right, so God is responsible for the creation of every single thing you see in this world, in this universe, is a creation of God. But there's only one creation that has the power of self-awareness. Self-awareness means that we can be aware of our past, we can be aware of our present, and we can be aware of our future. There's no animal that could really have a sophisticated sense of their past or of their future. The only sense that they have, the only awareness they have is very limited, where they just are aware if they're hungry or they need attention. That's pretty much what the awareness of an animal is. The human being has the awareness, the sophistication to know that there's an end, there's a finality to our lives. So it works to our benefit, because if you have that knowledge, you're always going to work to make your life better. You're going to maybe do things that if you didn't have that knowledge, you wouldn't have done. For example, today in modern day, people have what's called a bucket list. I don't know, people have 5, 10 items that they put on their bucket list. And they say, these are the things that I need to do before I pass away. So why do we do that? Because we have an awareness. It's a creation. It's a power that was given to the creation of the human being. It's an unbelievable thing. So it could work to our advantage and benefit, but it can also work, God forbid, to our disadvantage, to our detriment, because that brings in the fear of this feeling that I will be gone and it's all over, the idea of finality. In philosophy, I'm sorry, in psychology, not philosophy, but in psychology, there is a word for the theory. I'm sorry, there's a word for this fear, and it's called thanophobia. All right, so it's called thanophobia. I don't know if anybody here has heard that term, but it really is the idea of fearing your death, your passing away. So whatever emotions you have about dying, that fear in the parlance of psychology is called thanophobia. Now, if every one of us on one level or another suffers from the phobia of thanophobia, but the human being has a great mechanism to be able to deal with it. So what does a person do typically? If you're a 15-year-old kid and you're having a real good time in life, you're 20 years old and you're even 30 years old. I don't know, once you're 50, you're over the hill. So it's a little harder to deal with it. What does a typical teenager do to deal with the knowledge and the fear of death? What do? Denial. All you do is you shut down that thought, and we're in denial. Does denial take away thanophobia? Not at all. All right. It's buried somewhere in our subconscious. And believe it or not, we are affected by this fear and we behave in certain ways because of that fear. How many of us actually do good things so people will have good memories of us? We don't want to leave this world and people say, that guy, what a jerk. You know what I'm saying? So we think about other people, but about ourselves, we want people to say, wow, Yitzie, he was the greatest guy that ever lived. There was nothing ever better. And they should keep talking about me all the time. That's what we would love. So we do good things, actually, positive behavior based on a fear that's in our subconscious. It's an amazing thing. And God forbid people could do bad things. But I'm not going to get into the whole psychology of this because it's not my forte. It's not the thing that I do in my life. There is actually a theory that psychologists have come up with, and the acronym is called TMT, and that stands for Terror Management Theory. Imagine that the psychologists have turned it terror, that this fear actually terrorizes us. I mean, what do terrorists do? The idea of a terrorist, the reason they're called terrorists is they bring terror upon you so that you're fearful of whatever it is that you fear. You follow what I'm saying? That's the whole point, that you should live your life always in fear and you cannot lead a normal life. So psychologists call it TMT, and they say it's called terror management theory. And we suffer from this terror, and we have to figure out how to overcome it. So we have thanophobia, which is the phobia that we probably all suffer from, some more, some less. Most of us are in denial about it. As we become older, we have to deal with that true reality within our lives. But when we're younger, we have a very hard time dealing with this kind of stuff. This is important for us to know, because if we understand that we have a problem and we acknowledge it, then we can go about and deal with resolving it, or at least trying to make peace with it and living our lives as peaceful as possible without this kind of a terror. So this fear is actually expressed in a wonderful writing by a psychologist. His name is Irvin Yalom. So here is the reading over here, and he actually talks about the fear that we all have. Page number 3, if you guys can open your books. By the way, I hope that everybody received your, is there anybody who did not get their book yet? Raise your hand if you did not get a book yet. If you didn't get a book and you're not raising your hand, just contact me, call the office, email me, text me, whatever you want, and I'll make sure you get a book. It looks like everybody got their books, and I'm really grateful for that. Baruch Hashem. You know, in a normal JLI course, everybody comes to the class and I just give it out. Here we have to make sure that all of it is going out by FedEx and they actually arrive. So good news is that everybody has their books. That's fantastic news. Okay, let me read text number 1. It's on page number 3. Page number 3. Here it goes. Mortality has haunted us from the beginning of history. 4,000 years ago. Wow, that's about the time of Abraham, a little before that. The Babylonian hero Gilgamesh reflected on the death of his friend Enkidu with the words, "Thou hast become dark and cannot hear me. When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Sorrow enters my heart. I am afraid of death." Gilgamesh speaks for all of us. As he feared death, so do we all, each and every man, woman, and child. For some of us, the fear of death manifests only indirectly, either as generalized unrest or masqueraded as another psychological symptom. Other individuals experience an explicit and conscious stream of anxiety about death. And for some of us, the fear of death erupts into terror that negates all happiness and fulfillment. So this reading is really very important for us to realize that we all have on one level or another level, in one form or one shape or another, the fear, and perhaps, if you want to use a stronger word, we have the terror that brings about the great emotion of fear of the death. COVID-19 has not been any help to us and has really created the perfect storm of fear and anxiety associated with death. This is a real thing. People are behaving in a way where they literally react, they act out because they're fearful of their death. I mean, I'm not going to get into the whole political thing, but I'm talking about, people screaming at each other, literally on streets, on planes and all that, about mask wearing and all that. I'm not here to say whether one side is right or wrong, but the point is it really brings out our fear of death, and we might not even realize it. It's very important for us to understand it. So I hope today that we're going to come to an understanding of how we really can get a handle of the fear of death, of thanophobia. Okay, and that's why it's important for us to come to this class today. So Baruch Hashem, I'm glad that we're all here. All right, so now we're going to begin to try to make sense of what death is, and is it really the end of us? So we spoke about the fear. The fear is it's over, it's final, we're done with. That's the definition of death for many people on an emotional level. I'm not saying it's for everybody. Could be some people here don't believe that. And by the way, there are many people here who, are observant of Judaism, are knowledgeable on Judaism. And the ideas that I'm going to talk about right now might not be, something very novel, might not be something new. We've spoken about these things in many times, but it's important to learn it, to understand it, to speak about it in a detailed way. I myself, when I live my Jewish life, I have to connect it to the mystical traditions of Judaism, not metaphysics, not something that's, a nice book that I read on metaphysics or Kabbalah, as we call it in Hebrew. I live my life as a student of Kabbalah. And the reason for that is because in order for me to understand the observances of Judaism, to understand the harder parts of life, suffering, death, loss of loved ones, afterlife, before life, soul, you need to have something spiritually concrete, something mystical that could make sense, bring some logic in my own mind. So as a rabbi, I have to, officiate and many simchas, you have to do weddings and you have to do, but I love it. I love to do a wedding. One of my nice things I started to do in modern day, it wasn't my idea. I saw another rabbi doing it, but I love the idea. At the chuppah, I turn around, I take my phone and I do a selfie picture. People love that. And everybody gets into the picture, and the bigger the chuppah, the more people, it's a nice thing to do. So I love that. We do bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, a bris, but part of the package is Funerals, you have to do it. Unfortunately, during COVID, I've done quite a few funerals, and these were one of the more tragic funerals that I've ever done in my lifetime. Of all the people, and I don't do funerals that many times. I've done about 5, 6 of them. In the beginning in April, I did like 2 funerals in April about Passover time in the beginning of COVID. And these weren't deaths of COVID, but nevertheless, literally in one case, nobody was there. In the other case, it was just a brother who showed up. And literally we had no one to even be pallbearers. It was just incredibly sad. I had to beg people to come and help me. It was just a very sad moment. But anyhow, the point is that in a typical funeral, whether it's gravesite or in a chapel, I have to talk to the family, to the people who have lost their loved ones, and I have to say something that I can connect with them, that's meaningful, that's impactful. And in order to make that impact, you have to say something that you believe. You can't just say words that you're just trying to placate and satisfy some kind of an emotional feeling, but you have to truly believe it. That's the way I live my life as a rabbi. So one of the things that I always talk about is that, and one of the things I try to do is avoid the word die or death. I try to avoid that word as much as possible. The word has to come up. And instead, I replace it with another word. What do you think the word I use? Instead of dying, I will say what? What word can I use to replace dying with? Passing is a good word, by the way. I do use that word as well. Very good. Passing is a great word. Anybody want to share a word that you can think of? Anybody? Huh? Departing. Okay. The person departed. Yeah, that's good. I use the word to describe the passing or the death of somebody, a transition. It is a transition. Why do I use the word transition? It's not because I'm a smart guy and I heard it from someone else, or I think it's just a great idea. It's because it's a truth. It's a truth in Jewish tradition, in Jewish scholarship, in the Torah. The idea of life is the idea of death does not really exist. The idea of death is not in our vocabulary, because the understanding, the idea of our life is that it is an infinite life. We live forever. Now, Mimi's looking at me and saying, "What are you talking about? I haven't seen anybody live forever." So that's what we're going to have to understand. How is it that life is eternal? Life is forever. It's eternal. That's what we believe. So we have the life before it came into the physical world, and then we have the life in the physical world, and then we have the life afterwards. So what is that life? We call it, of course, a neshama. It is a soul. Have you ever asked yourself, who am I? Not where am I? Who am I? It's a deeper question. Where am I is, I'm always asking, where am I when I park my car at Costco and at Ralph's? I say, where am I? Because I can't find my car. I'm not joking. I lost my car the other day. I was like so absent-minded. I was in some other world. I literally spent 20 minutes at Costco looking for my car. I'm not asking, where am I? That we ask all the time. But the deeper question is, who am I? Who are we really? At the bottom line, who are we really? So are we parts of our body? Are we a head? Are we a heart? Are we a finger? Are we hands, arms? And what are we? So does anybody know who we are? What are we? So yeah, Ellen, do you want to share something? Oh, okay. But so the idea of who we are is a very important question. And it's a very important and integral part of Jewish life. You have to know who you are. So we're not physical bodies. We are souls. Each and every one of us is a soul. The Hebrew word for soul is neshama. Every one of us is a neshama. The body is, in a way, the thing that houses the neshama. So let me ask you guys a question. I ask questions because I'm hoping that people will it's a better way of learning. 'Cause what kind of analogies could you use when it comes to the relationship between yourself, that's the wrong word, your body and your soul? What kind of analogy, what metaphor would you use, examples would you use to understand the concept of the relationship between the body and the soul? Who can give me some ideas? Does anybody want to share an idea? If anybody does, just unmute yourself and you could share an idea. What would be a good idea? Okay. Ellen.
Yeah, so when I was reading through this, I wrote down that I was thinking of Cinderella being carried by her pumpkin carriage, and that
Wow.
and the carriage is her body, and she's the soul. And then at midnight, the carriage dissolved, and her soul is released. So
That is very creative, by the way. I could not have even thought of that. I really like that. That's very, very good. No, that's a great metaphor, a great example. Now I'm a guy, so what do I think about? I was at the mechanic yesterday. I had to bring in my car for some whatever crazy reason, and I thought about the two things. I thought about the body and the engine. You know, the body of the car is pretty much worthless. If you have no engine in your car, it's worthless. The most important part of your car, the life force of your car, is your engine. That's what makes your car move from one point to another point. You can also use the metaphor of a car and gasoline. Another more refined analogy might be the piano and music. That's another one, piano and music. So the piano in and of itself is not much. The music is the soul of the piano. That's what brings life to the piano. Without the music, you don't need the piano. A computer, hardware and software, you know, that's another example. They are not perfect analogies, but it gives us a way for our minds, our intellect to make it more tangible for us to understand the body and the soul. Look, there's no doctor that can do surgery and take out your soul and, you know, show it off. You know, we can't dissect your soul. So we don't really have a hold on it, a good description, but we can talk about ideas about the neshama, about the soul. Rabbi Chaim Vital. Now, who is Rabbi Chaim Vital? I'm not going to give you the whole history, but Rabbi Chaim Vital is the student of one of the greatest modern day Kabbalists. Anybody know who one of the greatest modern day Kabbalists is? Mimi, you heard of the greatest modern day Kabbalist? When I say modern day, within the last 500 years. His name was Rabbi Isaac. Well, Mimi was going to say me. I'm the greatest Kabbalist. All right, I'm the greatest Kabbalist for right now, for the next hour and a half. Afterwards, you should listen to somebody else probably. Okay, the greatest Kabbalist in the 1600s was Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. I don't know if you've heard of him. People call him by his Hebrew acronym. They call him the Ari Zal, meaning Ari stands for Avram Yitzchak, something, but his name was Yitzchak Luria, and he actually was born in Poland. He moved to Israel, and guess where he moved to in Israel? He lived in Tzfat. They call it this city of the Kabbalists. I don't know. It's a very isolated place, great weather. It's in the mountainous area. I don't know. Kabbalah is just in the air. Wherever you walk in the city of Tzfat, it's a northern city in Israel. You just feel the Kabbalist, energy in that area. Anyhow, he passed away when he was 36 years old. He never wrote down any of his teachings. All of his teachings were written down by his foremost student, and his name was Rabbi Chaim Vital. And he wrote these books based on the talks and discussions and teachings of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. You can look at all in Wikipedia. I'm not making this up. And Rabbi Chaim Vital wrote a book called Shari Kedusha, the holy gates, and in it he has beautiful ideas about life and the soul and all that good stuff. So we're going to read text number 2, and he's going to explain what life is really all about. Who are we? So he explains the relationship between the body and the soul. Page number 5. Here it goes. The wise are aware that the human body is not the human being. When we speak of the human being, we are referring to the human inner dimension. The body is merely a garment in which the soul is attired during its sojourn in this world. So he says that the body in and of itself is pretty much the housing for the soul. So when we ask the question, who are we? Who are you? Who am I? The answer is, I am a soul. The real me is my soul, not my body. Okay, that's who we are. Now, many people will answer, who am I? My knowledge, my intellect, my emotions, my feelings, my fears, my desires. That's who I am. That's not who you are in your essence. In your essence, each and every one of us is their soul. That's who you are. You are your soul. Okay? So now that we know that the real me is my neshama, neshama means soul, what exactly is a soul? What is a soul? Who can define what a soul is? So, of course, we're not asking for a physical description of what the soul is, but what words could you use to explain what the soul is? So, the soul is the way we understand what a soul is a soul is a creation which God created at the beginning of creation, and it's a part of God himself. If you read the beginning of when God created the world, it says, B'Tselem Elokim Nivra et Adam. God created man in the image of God. And that's not referring to the body. All right? God does not have a corporeal head. God does not have hands like we have. It is our essence, it's our neshama, our souls, that is a part of God within each and every one of us. So that soul, which is a part of God, was created by God in the beginning of creation. And by the way, all the souls that will ever live in this universe have already been created. The question is when they're going to be paired together with their bodies and come down to this earth. That's a whole different story. But we were existing. Each and every one of us lived way before we were born and came into this universe. And here's the better news. We are all going to live eternally after the soul and the body separate from each other. Let's read a very interesting text from when God created the world. Because in this text, we're going to read 3 texts, by the way. We are going to see that when God created the human being, he created them very differently. God created the human being very different than when he created all other species, all animals, land animals, mammals, fish, birds, whatever it might be, insects. When he created the human being, he created them very differently. And I would like you to be able to figure out what the difference of the creation of a human being is versus all other species. So let's read text number 3a, then I'm going to read 3b, and let's see if you guys get it. All right, here it goes. Page number 6. God formed the human of soil from the earth and breathed into his nostrils a neshama, a soul of life. And the human being became a living being. All right? This transpired, of course, on the 6th day of creation. But earlier, before God created man, because man was the last creation, before God created man, God created the animals. Let's see what the Torah says about creating the animals, and let me see if you guys can see a distinction, a difference between God creating humans and God creating animals. Here's what the Torah says. Look at page 6, 3b. God said, let the earth bring forth living beings of differing species, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth, according to their species, and it was so. All right. Who could see a difference between the creation of man, human beings, and the creation of all other species? So if you look at text number 3a and 3b, you will notice a distinct difference between those two creations. All right, any brave people want to share something? Did anybody find anything? No soul. Okay.
No,
So, okay,
Right.
go ahead. I heard somebody say something, but I didn't.
I just said, I said neshama.
Neshama. Okay, that's what people are saying over here. That is not really true. There's a neshama. There has to be by the way, a neshama means that there's life force. So your table and your couch and your chair all have a neshama. Now, it's not the soul of a human being. It's not even the soul of an animal. So I understand that, because you're getting somewhere, by the way. You are onto something. So let's go back to text 3a. Notice in 3a, when God creates the human being, he creates him in two phases. What are the two phases? Phase number one, he says, I'm forming the human being. He takes the soil, right, from the earth, and he forms the human being. So that is one entity. There's a physical, inanimate aspect to the human being. It has no life force yet. It is already a creation, but it's not living yet. When does it start living? When he takes phase number two, and he brings the soul and places it inside that formation, which was soil, and now it has a life force. So what happens here is we see that he takes the human being, he takes the physical soil, which becomes the body, and he brings the soul, the neshama, which is the soul, and he puts them together, which means that they are two separate entities. They have almost nothing in common with each other. One is a spiritual entity, one is a physical entity. When he creates the animal, how does he create it? He creates it as one unit. The soul of the animal and the body of the animal is one unit. And what that really tells us is something very important, that when it comes to the human being, the soul is independent of the human being, which means that soul existed before the human being is born, or in the case of Adam and Eve, was created, was put together, existed before. It exists while the person is alive, and it will exist for all eternity after the body is separated from the soul. On the other hand, an animal, when it's created, the soul and its body are created immediately at that time, and it dies off. The soul and the body of an animal do not live for all eternity. I know people have animals and they're animal lovers. This is not, God forbid, to speak disparagingly, but this is the traditional Jewish understanding of the difference between the creation of humans versus the creation of animals. Live their physical life together with their spiritual life. They didn't live before it was created, and they will not live after. Human beings were created day one, so they lived. They enter this world, continue to live, and then when the body dies off, the soul continues to live on. So here is a very important piece of information for us, that the body and the soul are not dependent on each other. In fact, I will go as far as to say the soul is not even impacted by its life here in this world. It's not affected by what goes on here. It goes back to its habitation up in the spiritual worlds. Let's read text 3c. This, in very short, explains this idea. God did what he had not done with any other creature. He blew into Adam with his Holy Spirit a neshama that is immortal and does not perish when the body does. So the body will decay and perish, but the soul will live on for all eternity. By the way, as a side note, the word human comes from the Latin word humus, not humus. Not humus. Humus, you got hungry, huh? Humus means in Latin soil. That's just an interesting thing, that the word human means soil. Yeah, from Latin, comes from the Latin word soil. All right, so we have 2 points we made in this up to now, 2 very important points. The first point is the real me is my soul, not my body. And the second point is the real me. The soul is eternal, and therefore I am eternal. You are all eternal. Every human being is eternal. So now we can understand, it gives us a little solace here. It gives us a better definition of what life is all about. Life is not about the body. Life is about the soul. And if life is about the soul lives on for all eternity. All right. And when a person passes on, I go back to the idea, the word that I used of transitioning. The life force remains and it continues. So a human being never ever dies. The human being always continues to live. The body is what the housing is what ends, but the human being continues to live on for all eternity.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
does the soul have a consciousness?
Right. So Mimi's asking me if the soul has a consciousness. So it's not really the topic for today, but the answer is, of course, it has a consciousness. It has to have a consciousness, and not in this lesson, but in one of our other lessons, we're going to talk about the relationship that the soul has with the body, because we're just learning generalities right now, but we're going to get to a little bit more nuanced. And there is a relationship that the soul has with the body. But today we're not going to explore that idea, but certainly it has a level of consciousness. That means it has an awareness and it has a knowledge of its connection to the physical world. But that's for another lesson. So the body, it seems to us, the soul, it seems to what we're learning here, is not really affected by the birth and by the death, because the neshama, the soul, is eternal. It came here it was born at creation, or it was created by creation. It comes down here into this world, lives its life here. We're going to talk in a moment what's the purpose of that. And ultimately, it lives on after the body passes away. The Midrash actually has a very beautiful description about what happens before the soul enters the physical life. Now, imagine you're a baseball player, and you're on a winning team, and you're doing really well. You're slugging home runs, and you're doing very well, and everything is great. You like your manager, and you like your co-players. You like everything about it. And one morning you hear that, you're being traded. You got to go to another team. And it's a team that's probably not even doing that well. They can't get their act together. The manager, he doesn't know what he's doing. And the general manager doesn't know what he's doing. The city is not a great city. The fans are horrible fans. What would your feeling be? Not good. Well, most of us would not know because we're not major league players, but we can only imagine that it doesn't feel good. Well, how about a job? How about if you love your job, or within your job, you're in a position that you like, you're very comfortable, everything is known to you. There's no surprises. You're in a very comfortable place. How about you're sitting in your couch? Like, half of us are sitting in one comfortable couches, and someone says, "Hey, get out of your couch, sit on a rougher place." It's not comfortable. I'm saying this because that's what the soul experiences, and times that by an infinite amount of times an infinite amount of numbers. The soul is not willing to come down into this world. It doesn't really want to be here. It's an uncomfortable place for it. So let's read text number 4 to see the uncomfortable position the soul finds itself in. 40 days before the conception of the child, God summons the angel in charge of the souls and tells him, "Bring before me a certain soul that is now in paradise. Its name is such and such, and its appearance is such and such. This is possible because all the souls that are born in this world were created on the day the world was created, and it exists until the end of time." So the souls are there. The angel goes and brings the soul before God. The soul bows and prostrates itself before the supreme King of Kings. God instructs the soul, "Please enter the seminal drop that is currently in the hands of the angel in charge of pregnancy." The soul protests, "Master of the universe, I'm quite satisfied with the world I inhabited since the day you created me. I am holy and pure, hewn from your throne of glory. Why do you wish to cause me to enter this putrid drop?" Okay? What is this text really telling us? That the soul, first of all, is not physical. We can't say the soul is physical. So if it's not physical, it doesn't belong on this universe. The soul is not interested in the physical world. That's another idea. The soul has no need for the body. It's not yearning to be with a body. In fact, the body only limits it. It hinders its expression of spirituality. It's all physical, material here. The soul, the neshama, is content leading a spiritual existence up in heaven. It's blissful. It's fantastic up there. So what does the ethics of our fathers say? Something very powerful about the soul, the experience of the soul. And he says that the soul in heaven, everything about it is so much greater than this world. Listen to what the Mishnah says, text number 5. This world is like a corridor before the world to come. Prepare yourself in the corridor so that you may enter the palace. So it's a decline. You are getting demoted when you come to this world, because this world is the corridor. Up there is the palace. Where do you want to be, in the palace or the corridor? A single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. So what do we have from this whole thing here is, the bottom line is that the neshama, the soul, has no relationship with the body. It's unaffected by it. It doesn't want to be here. It's just not interested in all of this. It's eternal. It's spiritual. It loves to be in a palace. Palace means up with God. So it's in a totally different place. So that sounds like a beautiful thing, but at the end of the day, we have to understand that that's not the full story. I didn't give you the full picture of life, because at the end of the day, you can all ask me a good question. So then what are we doing here? If the soul thinks it's much better to be upstairs, up in the palace, then what's the whole purpose of life here? So what are we doing over here? What is our purpose for this neshama to enter into this world? What are we doing over here? Why do we have to come down here? So therefore, I want to embellish this question. Everybody here, I believe, has been to Shul on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the high holy days. What is the biggest request, the biggest thing you ask from God on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur? Anybody want to say? Give me an answer. What's the biggest thing, not personal, a general thing? What's a general big thing that we ask for from God on Rosh Hashanah? It's in the prayer book, and we keep saying it over and over. Forgiveness, that's true. What else? Anybody want to share what is the biggest thing that we are asking for from God? And we keep saying it over and over.
We ask for life.
Exactly.
Yes.
Blessing or life. What do we beg God? Zachreinu l'chaim. God, please give me life. And we keep saying it over and over and over. Please give me life, give me life. Well, one second. I thought it's better to be up there than down here. What are you asking for life? If anything, what should we ask for? We should ask for death, transition. We should ask, hey, I want to go back to my source where it's much more fun. It's not a whole lot of fun over here. This world comes with what? Pain, suffering, agony, grief. You got a lot of problems in this world. Why shouldn't we, go to another world? You know what's very interesting? If you look at, I'm actually quoting a great rabbi, a Spanish rabbi. His name was the Radvaz. The Radvaz was actually very disturbed. He lived in Morocco, and then he lived in Egypt. I believe he was born in Spain. I could be wrong in that. But the Radvaz, in his writings, he writes this in his teachings. He says something very, very, very interesting. He says, you should know, I observed the Muslims, and I noticed that amongst the Muslims, they don't put too much emphasis in grief of the loss of a loved one. So when he went to funerals, or when he went to, and by the way, he had relationships with Muslims. He was an advisor to, I don't know, some sultans and kings, and he was a big, like they say in Yiddish, a big macher. He got himself around. He noticed that they didn't put too much emphasis in their grief. And the reason for that, he explains, is because they believe, as we're explaining, that the real life force, the place where the soul really wants to be, is where? Up in heaven. And he didn't understand that, because in Judaism, it's the opposite. In Judaism, what do? We take our garment before we even bury the person, and we rip our garment. I don't know if you guys know that tradition. In America, I don't know where this came from, but they take a ribbon, black ribbon, and they rip it. Okay, so we sit for 7 days, and everybody comes and tells us nice things, consoling words, and they're trying to comfort us, and they bring us food, and they ask what they can do for us. And then you have a 30-day period of mourning. We're going to learn about all this stuff. 12 months, and then every year, and then we have Yizkar. We're remembering our loved ones. 1 second, if they're great places to be up there, I want to forget about this world. I want to forget about this life. What's going on over here? So. In fact, I'm going to skip text number 6, but text number 6 just shows us that we must fight for life. That means like this: if someone threatens you, either you commit a crime. I don't mean a crime like murder, but I'm sorry. Let me rephrase this. That's a bad way of phrasing it. If someone puts a gun to your head and says, "I want you to violate a commandment in the Torah," whatever it is, stop keeping the Sabbath, stop eating kosher, don't be nice to someone, I don't know, whatever it is, don't give loans, you must violate the rule. You must violate the rule of the Torah. Why? Because you must live this life. Life is precious. Life is precious. That's what all the teachings say. Every piece of Talmud, every Mishnah, every Maimonides, Nachmanides, they all say this. You must live your life. It's in the Torah. You must live for the mitzvahs, not die for them. What's wrong with dying for the mitzvahs? If that's what life is all about for the mitzvahs, what the heck? Let's, God forbid, let somebody shoot you. You don't have to look to leave this earth, but maybe you should not violate the mitzvah because it doesn't really matter, because you're going to continue to live your life. So here's the interesting thing. Let's read text number 7. God hurries, and by the way, this is the continuation of the Mishnah. When we mentioned the Mishnah earlier, and we spoke about how the soul doesn't really want to come down into this world, right? And it's fighting. Here's something very powerful. The soul knows at the end it must come into this world. Here's what the Midrash says: God hurries to reassure the descending soul. So now the soul is complaining. He says, I don't want to be traded. I don't want to go down to the world. The world to which I am bringing you will prove more beneficial than the one you presently inhabit. Indeed, I formed you exclusively for the purpose of creating mortal life from this particular drop of seed. With that, God forcibly installs the soul. Anybody ever go skydiving? Nobody went skydiving? Michelle, you never went skydiving?
No.
Anyhow, I never went skydiving, but I imagine, but there's a part of me that wants to do it, but I'm not doing it. But I imagine that if I did it and I'm on the plane and you got the parachute and the guy says, okay, jump. I'm not jumping. I'm telling you now, I want the guy to push me off. Okay. I'm not jumping. It's not going to happen. All right. Or a bungee, those bungee jumps. I'm not doing it. You have to push me. It's the same with the soul. Now the soul knows that it must come into this world for its own benefit, but it just doesn't want to make the jump. So somebody's got to push it. So God says, okay, whether you like it or not, he forcibly pushes the soul into this world. Why is that? This is a sort of a contradiction here. On the one hand, and by the way, let me read the second reading here, text number 8. And this will contradict what we said earlier about the soul enjoying all the blissfulness of heaven. But in this reading, we're going to see the opposite. Page 13, everybody. A single moment of repentance and of good deeds in this world is greater than all of the world to come. This statement comes from the exact same Mishnah. It's the same text, by the way. The same rabbis writing the other part where it's greater to be in heaven. One moment in heaven is greater than all physical life. And then the rabbi saying, well, one moment in this world is also greater. It means like this, that yes, it means that the soul's life, it means our life. When we speak about the soul, we're not speaking about a third party. We're speaking about ourselves. The soul understands it's a much better place up in heaven. There's no pain there. There's revelation. There's truth. There's godliness. There's holiness. There's everything you can ever want. Okay? It's just great up there. But at the same time, being up in heaven has no purpose in and of itself. God created the heavens. God created the soul, but he created it for a specific mission and a specific purpose. And that is for us to come into this world. And it's in this world that we get to revitalize, we get to, there's another word I'm looking for, to reestablish the soul, to make the soul a better soul. To get the soul to do its mission, it must come into this world. For the soul just to live on vacation up in heaven is useless. We don't need it. You don't need all the fanfare of heaven. This whole idea of eternity is meaningless. The whole purpose of the soul, which means the whole purpose of us, is to come into this world. God desired, for whatever reason, I don't know the reason, God created a world, a universe, for the soul to come down in this world and to live, bring a life force, a spiritual life force in this world. You know, if you think about it, the body has no life. It's dead. Our bodies are really dead. The only reason we are moving is because we have a soul, we have a neshama. That's the only real life force that we have. So when a person dies, the only thing that dies off is the thing that was dead to begin with. Nothing, the body never lived. It only had this energy. It's like, it's not the best example, but if you take a light bulb and you disconnect it from electricity, the electricity keeps living on, but the light is dead. It means there's nothing more you can do with it. Throw it out, toss it out, bury it. But the soul always lives on. And when we understand things in this way, we can make a reconciliation with the idea of the fear and perhaps the terror that we have about death. So when we say that we are fearful of death and thanophobia, gotta get the word right here, thanophobia, we have that fear of death. If a person can truly believe, and if a person can meditate, and by the way, you have to live your life in such a way that our lives are not our physical lives. Our lives are really about our souls. Who we are our souls, which means we were here before we came into this world. And we are here in this world, and we're going to continue to live. If we understand, and the soul has to come into this world for a certain amount of time, for a period of time of life, then death does not become as fearful as you would think. You know, for most people, the consolation that we have is, and the hope we have is, that people will remember our good deeds. People will have happy and good memories of us. That's good. But Judaism takes it one notch further. Judaism says the reason you shouldn't fear death is because there is no such thing as death. That's the argument that we are making today, is that the soul is eternal. It must come into this world to accomplish a certain mission. It's here to refine the soul and bring it to greater heights. When it graduates in this world, it goes to a place, to its eternal habitat, but it benefits from being in this world up in heaven. This is the way we understand, this is the way we see things in the Jewish perspective. So when we say that we live on, these are not just, comforting words. These are true, objective words based on traditions of Judaism. I want to read a beautiful idea from the Talmud. Page number 14, text number 9. God created the universe on a condition. If the Jews accept the Torah, he told the universe, you will continue to exist. If they do not, I will return you to nothingness. This goes back to what I was saying earlier, that there's a purpose of life. It means there's no point of life if people don't do their mission in life. You must do something here in this world. That's something that's very, very important. Yeah.
So when you transition back, what is the point of your soul then, or you? What is your mission?
Great question. Mimi's asking a fantastic question that I don't really have the full answer because it's a long answer. She's asking a very good question. So the soul finished its mission here in this world, and now it graduated and it went to the other world. And yes, it has become a better neshama, a better soul. So what's the purpose at that point? The analogy that I would give, and it's not a great analogy, would be, when a person works their whole life, they earn a pension. I hope people are earning their pension, or you're investing money in your IRA, right? But you only reap the benefits after you've accumulated a certain amount of money, and hopefully it's enough money, not enough, but a lot of money to live a good, lavish, fun life, with cars and homes and vacations and cruises, the things we used to do in the olden days. Those are the benefits. Those are the rewards for working really hard. We're going to talk about reincarnation to address your question. But in the short answer, it reaps benefits. But reaping benefits in and of itself is only an effect of what happened in this world. So it doesn't really explain in a bigger way what the purpose the soul really has. But what's important for us to know is that the soul is eternal, which means we never really die off. There's a very interesting reading here, text number 10, that really proves the point that the soul knows it has to be in this world. Let me read this, page number 15. Here's what the Ethics of Our Father says. It's in the Mishnah. Against your will, you are formed. So God forms us. It's against our will. And against your will, you are born. Nobody ever asked us permission if we should come into this world. Against your will, you will live. And there's a contradiction in the next line. And against your will, you will die. Well, one second. Maybe either you're against your will to live or you're against your will to die. You can't have it both ways. Either I'm against living, but I'm happy with death because I love it up in heaven. But why are we against dying? What's wrong with dying? You're going back to your eternal habitat. The reason we're against it is because the soul on a certain level knows that it wants to be here to accomplish a certain mission. That would be like the guy who reached 65 and he's offered a retirement package. And the guy says, no, I want to work for another 5 more years. He's kicking, or she's kicking and screaming, I don't want to leave my employment. Why? Because you want to reap more, you have more things to do. Giving an example. So the soul knows it needs to be here. So death is really not the end. That's what we just learned. But nevertheless, we value life. We understand that living in this world is very, very important. There's a very beautiful idea, a story, not an idea, about the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And this story will help us understand how the attitude of someone who is not terrorized by the fear of death. In 1929, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was living in Russia, in a city called Rostov. And we all know that, after the, World War I and the Russian Revolution, Russia became a communist state, and it was terribly anti-Jewish, completely anti-Jewish. And, anti-religion, but more specifically, anti-Jewish religion. And it was Jews themselves who made a very big effort to suppress other Jews who want to live an observant Jewish life. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was one of the only great rabbis that remained in Russia. There were very few who remained. Everybody fled. And the Rebbe made a decision that he was going to fight the communists. And he built underground Jewish schools for kids to learn, like Hebrew schools. He built a mikveh for communities. He built shuls. He built a matzah bakery. He trained rabbis to become a moel, to do circumcision, all the things that people would need, the support you need to be a Jew. In 1929, it caught up with him, and they arrested him. The Rebbe was a very stubborn person, for the good, and he decided that he was not going to cooperate because what they wanted to do is coerce him into a confession. And if he confesses, basically they'll kill him. So he was not stupid. He understood that they want to kill him, or at best, send him to Siberia in the gulags for a long 20 years, which very few people survive. So there was no incentive for him to cooperate. So number one of the things he did was he decided that he would not communicate in Russian. He knew Russian, and he was going to speak in Yiddish, which meant that they had to hire a translator. It just made things more complicated, and it made things more drawn out. And whatever they would ask him, he was not divulging any information. They wanted to know names of the people who were working for him to arrest them, kill them. And he didn't give them anything. And they were very frustrated. So they decided to escalate the interrogation, and they got a better interrogator. And this interrogator was renowned for opening up the mouths of the most stubborn people. When it came to the Rebbe, this guy was surprised that he couldn't get Rabbi Schneerson to talk. He couldn't get him to talk. So at some point, he takes out a gun, a revolver, and it's in text number 11. So I'm going to read now from the middle of it. And the Rebbe describes it in his memoirs. He writes like this: he looked me in the eye and mockingly said, "This small toy has incredible powers. It causes principles to melt away. It opens mouths under its spell. Even mutes have become talkative." This guy's a real chutzpah. So what did the Rebbe respond? The Rebbe says, I responded, "You are quite mistaken. That toy only has an effect on faint-hearted non-believers, those with one world and multiple gods. We, on the other hand, we as Jews, have one God and two worlds. As such, I don't panic at the sight of your toy. It has no effect on me whatsoever." The Rebbe wants to live. Everyone wants to live. Who wants to die? But the Rebbe was not fearful of the revolver. And by the way, he could have been shot and killed. There's no accountability. I mean, these people didn't run a country with law and order. This was a terrible, terrible place. And the Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, is not perturbed. He's not disturbed. He's not fearful. He's not terrorized by the gun. Why? Because he's a person who truly believes that we live eternally. We are eternal. This is just a corridor. This is sort of like a byway to continue our eternal lives. That attitude is an unbelievable way to deal with the fear that we might have with the idea of death. You know, text number 13 also has another beautiful story of a great rabbi from the Talmud. But I want to transition now for a moment as we end the lesson. I want to transition that when we talk about the idea of that we are eternal. So that's good for the idea of death. That helped us, how are we going to view our passing? But before I explain this point, there is another idea within Judaism that we're not going to explore right now. It's not the right time. We don't have the time for it. But it is the idea to help with the idea of fear of death is the idea, and really this is to help us understand the loss of a loved one, especially when they passed away at a very young age. We believe, number one, that we have a mission in life. And if you have a mission in life, you only have a certain amount of time to accomplish the mission. So if a person passes away, it means that the time of that mission was up. It means the mission was accomplished. All right? And while we're living our lives, we have to feel that we haven't accomplished the mission. So we have that sense that we have to always accomplish the mission. And somebody who passes away at a young age, or any age, by the way, it doesn't matter what age, but this is more so to understand what is really going on is the person fulfilled their mission. They did what they needed to do on this world. They lived their life. They lived their life. And they continue to live their life. Nothing has really changed. The only thing is that they had something unusual. They had to live in this world for a shorter period of physical years. But in the scheme of the life of who we are in the soul, nothing has really changed. Everything stays the same. There's a lot more to talk about that idea of mission accomplished regarding the soul. There's a lot to talk about it, but there's just no time for it. But I want to delve into something very, very important. One of the things that I mentioned that it could be that it didn't resonate, it didn't get absorbed. We are living two kinds of life. We are living one life that's a life of death, and we are living a life that's a life full of life. What is a life of death? Anytime you do something and it doesn't live on, it has no purpose and it has no meaning, that is living death. So if we live for our cars, if we live for our materialism, if we live for vanity of life, you're living a life of death. You are dead in your life. I visit Terminal Island, at least before COVID I did. That's a prison right here, right after the Vincent Thomas Bridge. in San Pedro. One of the things that I talk to the prisoners, Jewish prisoners, everybody make sure to pay your taxes. I don't want to visit you there. I don't want to have to bring you kosher meals. But anyhow, one of the ideas that I hear a lot from the complaints is in prison, you don't live, you exist. Existing means that you're dead. That's all it means. You're not living. There's no life force in you. You're just a walking zombie. We have that within ourselves. If we are not living spiritually motivated, godly life for the reason that we are put in this world, then we are living, we are existing and not living. We are living in death versus life. But when we do a mitzvah, when we do something to help somebody, when we do something that the Torah wants us to do, which means what God wants us to do, then we are living life. Every mitzvah we do has a life force that is eternal. And that's what it means that we continue to live on, that the soul lives on. The soul comes in here to accumulate, to collect as many mitzvot as possible. And that's what gives the soul much greater life force. So every mitzvah we do, the mitzvah creates greater eternal life for us. That's what a mitzvah does. It brings more life force for us. So number one, if you're fearful of thanophobia, of the fear of death, if you know that your mitzvah lives on for all eternity and makes your soul live more eternal, there's nothing to fear. It makes things much more powerful. So if we have this paradigm shift about our lives, about who we are souls, and that we have a mission to do in this life, and if we do the godly things in life, that makes us live eternally with every mitzvah. We never die. Those mitzvahs never die. There's nothing more comforting than that idea, as far as I know. I mean, maybe there's a book out there, but I don't believe so. This is the most powerful way to live our lives. And I want to say something like this, something very important. This does not mean that when you go to a restaurant, in the olden days, when we went to restaurants, God willing, we'll do that again, you're eating and enjoying a steak. You're enjoying the company of the ambiance and the presence of other wonderful people. It's physical pleasure. It's emotional pleasure. It's limited to who we are as physical people. Those activities, those behaviors, going on a vacation, just enjoying life, having physical pleasure in life, we're not saying to avoid those things. We're actually arguing to embrace those things. Here's the caveat. Here is the but. When we do those things, they should not be the end game. I go on vacation, so I will have more energy. I will be in a better frame of mind to do a mitzvah with more quality and more quantity or whatever it might be. I'm not going to work to make a lot of money so I could buy a lot of things with it or become very powerful. That's not my end game. I go to work. I'm very competitive. I do my job as best as I can do because I'm going to use that money to do my next mitzvah. You don't have to even think about that all day long, but you have to create that attitude within yourself. I'm going to end this with an interesting story that just happened to me recently. It's not like a story, just a little anecdote. A plumber came to my house a few months ago. I had a water heater, what do you call it, a tankless water heater break. So I had to replace it. I didn't like the price of it, but whatever, that's a whole other story. Anyhow, so the guy was a really sweet guy. And we got into this conversation, and somehow he kept showing off how much money he makes. And he told me his salary. He's making over $300,000. I was floored. I said, what the heck am I doing? Can I work with you? By the way, if you're a physician, become a plumber. Now is the time. If you're an accountant, become a plumber. Whatever you're doing, become a plumber. I'm telling you, I never knew this. Anyhow, so the guy's telling me about all this stuff. So my head, if you know who I am, I always start making calculations, and I'm thinking, if he makes $300,000 and he's been doing it for about 20 years, the guy must have, with investments, at least $2 million in the bank account, which is not too shabby for a plumber. So I said to him, wow, You must have a really good IRA, a Roth IRA, and pensions. I don't know. You have all these. He says, I don't even have a dime. My kids, I don't know how I'm sending my kids to college. I go, what? So where did all your money go? He says, look, you live life once and you got to enjoy it. He says, every Friday, the minute he gets out of work, he goes to the bar. Goes to the bar. Goes to a good restaurant every Friday without fail. I go to synagogue and he goes to the bar. I want to be in his life. Anyhow, no, I'm just kidding. Anyhow, he goes to and he's a nice guy, by the way. He's the sweetest guy. But here's what he tells me. He says, you live your life once, you better enjoy it. He says, what am I going to do? Save the money for what? For when I'm 90? What am I going to do when I'm 90? Forgive me if anybody's 90. Nobody's 90. All right. What am I going to do with $2 million when I'm 90? I'm not going to have that much fun with it. Who's going to want to hang out with me? So I'm using my money now. That attitude, I believe, and this is my interpretation of this, I'm putting on my psychology hat and I'm projecting. So it's subjective, but my feeling is that he lives his life that way because of thanophobia. He is afraid of death. He said, I live life once. We say that a lot of times. I'm guilty of saying it also. Hey, you live life once, enjoy it. You know, thanophobia creates that feeling. Live life once, go enjoy your life. So I'm going to eat a steak because, if I don't do it today, I might not be able to do that tomorrow. Believe it or not, that we do that because it was created by the fear. The most liberating way to live your life is to eat the steak, go to the bar, have fun, but believe in your subconscious. It should be built into you. And remember, in your subconscious, so the memory is not on the top of your head, it's not in the front burner, but it creates the idea that you live your life forever. Forever. Whatever I'm doing is going to be eternal. The mitzvah I do is eternal. Drinking a glass of vodka for just drinking a glass of vodka or a glass of beer is dead on arrival. It was never alive to begin with. But eating a steak because I'm going to be more productive in my mitzvot, that steak now has a life force of its own for all eternity. It's a very powerful way to live your life. Now, what we did now was basically an intellectual exercise, and we did this through learning and study, so it's in our brain. The hard part now is, how does this sink into our neshama, into our hearts, and live that way? That's a whole other ballgame. That demands practice. That demands meditation, prayer, whatever it might be. By the way, I encourage everybody to read the appendix. If you read the end of the lesson, the extras, beautiful, beautiful stuff. If you read that stuff, it'll help to really bring everything that we said, to bring it into full circle and bring more depth to everything that we studied. Anyhow, it is 12:30, so we finished our 90 minutes. And if anybody has, at this point, any questions or answers or comments, I would love to hear what anybody has to say. Unmute yourself would be a great thing to do if you'd like to share anything. Anybody want to share something?
A Rabbi?
Yeah, Shoshana.
Hi. So, to me, actually, then given this, what's scary to me is that you briefly touched on the topic of reincarnation. So, if or when I come back again, I'm not going to remember who I was before. And it's like starting all over again. And to me, the not remembering is very scary.
Again, when you use the word I will or will not remember, who are you referring to?
Well, my neshama. Okay, my
Your neshama remembers.
when it's upstairs, but once it's put in a new body, it's not going to remember.
In your body, it knows. Your neshama knows a lot more than you think it knows. It has an awareness and a consciousness that's almost unlimited. It shares when we spoke in the beginning of the lesson. By the way, we're going to talk about reincarnation much more detailed in the 5th week, so we have some time for that. But when we spoke earlier that we have self-awareness, that self-awareness is not from the body. That is a certain part of the neshama exposing itself to us, to the body. That's why we can have that. We cannot have the same revelation that the soul has for a very simple reason. because the soul understands why we suffer. The soul understands why bad things happen to good people. We are not meant to understand these things. It would be a bad thing for the human being to understand for multiple reasons. It has to do with choice. It has to do with what kind of people would we become. I don't know. I was just speaking to a guy a few weeks ago. He tells me, Rabbi, I don't believe in God, the Holocaust. And I always ask, my first question to people when they say I don't believe in Hashem because of the Holocaust, I say, okay, if I can take you to a place where God will reveal why the Holocaust happened, so what would happen to you? What kind of person would you become? You have to really entertain that question. It's a very important question you have to ask yourself. So I'm going back to when you ask the question and you use the word I, who are you talking about? Who's the I that you're talking about?
I mean, it's like, amnesia. I mean, like when my soul goes back up, I suppose I'm saying but for lack of any, my
That's okay.
whatever, is gonna remember everything. But once my soul comes back down into a new body, it's like it's back to square one again.
No. The soul continues. We're going to talk more in detail about it, but in principle, the soul, don't forget, comes from the essence of God, a direct essence from God. So it is privileged to have God-based knowledge, God-based powers, God-based benevolence. It's got a lot of parts of God. That's what makes us godly. B'Tselem Elokim, we're created in the image of God, is because of the soul, not because of the body. The animal is not B'Tselem Elokim. It does not have the possibility, just to take this a little further. Why do we have the possibility of teshuvah, repentance? Why do we have the possibility of forgiveness, giving forgiveness to other people? That's because we have a soul. No animal in history of mankind has ever asked for forgiveness or given forgiveness, okay? It does nice things because it's instinctive, and I don't want to get into the whole psyche of the animal, but it in no way is near the capability of what the humans have. So our possibilities are only because of who we are, which is the neshama, which is the soul. So the soul only reveals to our minds a certain aspect of life. So you're right. The soul is limited in its way that it can express itself in this world. And that's why up in heaven, it expresses itself in the most unlimited way. And that's why it loves that world, because in that world, it is not condemned to and forced into a world of limitations. It's unlimited. I mean, just imagine you went to graduate school for whatever, learning, you're a great scholar, you're a great engineer, great accountant, physician, and then they told you to sit in a room and start packing boxes. Nothing wrong with packing boxes, but you're not free because you can't express everything, the knowledge and your abilities and your talents are not being expressed. So it's worse than boredom, it's suffering. So that part of the soul suffers in this world, but on the other hand, the soul knows that it has to be here because otherwise just being in heaven serves no purpose. Anyway, we're expanding this idea.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to share anything? I hope so. I hope everybody enjoyed the lesson for today. And I always tell Mimi, there's a lot of stuff we learned. There's a lot of moving parts, but really there's just one moving part. And the one moving part that we learned today, Mimi, if you are to tell your friends what you studied today, just say one thing. I'm living forever, baby. I'm eternal. And then they're going to say, you better get treatment. You need to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. No, but you will have what to base that knowledge, what to base that important idea. Anyhow, well, Baruch Hashem, I'm really happy that you guys joined us. Next week, we're going to continue lesson 2. Again, you're welcome to join Tuesday nights. You don't have to let me know. 7:30. Wednesday mornings at 11 o'clock. And I hope to see, and Don actually asked me, was it 11 a.m. Eastern time or Pacific time? So now I changed my website because now I realize we have people from the East Coast. Arizona refuses to change the time to California. Pacific time, so they need to know what time it is. Boy, you got to accommodate everybody here. Well, thank God, Baruch Hashem. I'm really happy about that. All righty, like they say in
Thank you.
French, sei gesund. And God willing,